the fourth day of the month of Tishrei, Taf Shin Pei Vav. We are in the midst of the Aser Simei Tshuva, and we are continuing with Limud, and we are sending out the link right now to the Amud Yomi chat. There we go. Sending that out now. There we go. Baruch Hashem. We have the schus of learning Daf Pesachim, Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis, and we are starting from the bottom of Lamed Daled. Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, where the Gemara is asking a kasha against what Rav Papa had said yesterday, which was Lo Yisachal Chametz means that you are chayv al chimutzay kares. Says v'ha hol be'ein adam yotze b'yidei chavasay dehavle matzah shira ein chayavim al chimutzay kares. That you're not chayv kares for anything that you cannot use for matzah. And Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua says back to Rav Papa, I don't like that. Why? Because the din is, we learned this yesterday, him chav v'gam oy, if you chewed, if you swallowed matzah after dissolving in water, you put it in water and then you swallowed it without chewing. Im chametzu anish karetz, if it's chametz, you get an anish karetz. But im matzahu, if that what you're doing here is trying to be mekayem the mitzvah of matzah, then ein adam yotzi yidei chavas b'pesach, then you have not eaten matzah. It says v'ha hachad ein adam yotzi yidei chavas b'matzah, and since you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of matzah by doing this, v'chayav and achman karetz, and you are going to get kares for it, it means that there has to be a middle ground. And it cannot be that the pasuk is telling you that it's a perfect Venn diagram. Therefore, says the Gemara, is ar behu Rav Idi bar Avin. In the meantime, Rav Idi bar Avin woke up and he said, Dariki, kids, kinderlach, although with a little bit more scorn. I'll tell you what Rish Lakish is saying. You don't know the din. This is the din. Mishum da havelu mei peros, because this has fruit juice in it. Mei peros and machmitzin. Mei peros does not create chametz at all. Says the Gemara, continuing with the din of the Mishnah, that you are able to fulfill your mitzvah of according to the Mishnah, you are able to fulfill your mitzvah of matzah with demai, with questionably tithed produce, and meiser, and with meiser rishon, from which truma has been taken. Says the Gemara, demai haloi chazle, but it says demai he's not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat demai. Since when can you even eat it? It's an issur of eating demai. It says kevin the boy mafkir nichse have aniva oichel demai. Well, the din is that only a poor person is allowed to eat demai. Therefore, since fundamentally, theoretically, if a person were to say, I don't own any of my property, mafkir is declares all of it owners, I suppose along with the rest of the chametz, so then he would be able to eat demai, and therefore it is fundamentally mutter. And since he could do it, then it is not fundamentally also for him to use. Ditnan, because the Mishnah tells us that you are allowed to feed demai to anim, and you are also allowed to feed it to the Jewish soldiers that are enlisted or conscripted. You can feed them demai. You need to feed them. They're coming in quick. Give them that. Amar Rav Huna says, Rav Huna Tana Beis Shammai Amrim. The Beis Shammai tells us, you are not allowed to feed demai to the anim, and you're not allowed to feed demai to the Jewish soldiers. Beis Hillel says that you are allowed to. Okay, and that is the din. Says the Gemara, quoting from the Mishnah, Ma'aser Rishon shenitla truma asai, Ma'aser Rishon, that the first truma was taken from, which means you can now eat it. Says the Gemara, pshita, that's obvious. So we say, no, because once you've already taken off the truma, that's called chulin. There's no reason not to be able to eat it. Why would this even be a din in the Mishnah? Says, well, no, you do need this. Why? Shikdu v'shibalim, v'not lehim and trumas ma'aser, v'lo not lehim menu truma gedola. The Rebbe about this is a niche case. Means that you took off truma while it was still in while the grain was still on the stalks. Meaning in general, the first thing that you do is the Levi would come and he would the Kohen comes and he takes Truma, and then the Levi comes and he takes Meiser. What happens if you took the Meiser before the Kohen took the Truma? So usually you can't do such a thing. But if he took it while it was still on stalks, meaning there was not yet a chiyuv of taking Meiser, and he took Meiser beforehand, and then Trumas Meiser was taken from. The Levi took Trumas Meiser from his chelek, but no Truma has been taken from the original pal yet. Says the Gemara, and this is a question according to Rabbi Abau. The Amar Rabbi Abau says, Amar Rish Lakish, Amar Shimon Lakish, then Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Meiser Rishon Shekdim Rishibalim. If you have the first Meiser that was preceded, the Levi preceded the Kohen while it was still in the stalks, Pater Truma Gedala, it is Pater. That Meiser is Pater from Truma Gedala. Shenemar. Because the pasuk tells us, you have to lift up from it, you have to raise from it Trumas Hashem, the Truma of Hashem, Meiser min ha-Meiser, a Meiser from the Meiser. Meiser min ha-Meiser amarti lach. The din is that you have to take Meiser from the Meiser. You don't have to take two Trumas from that Meiser, meaning the Levi is obligated to take off what he owes to the Kohen. Once he's done that, it works. Even if Truma Gedala hasn't yet been taken. Papa says that what comes out from this? So if that's true, why are you telling me that it's only a din if he was makdim b'shibalim? If it was makdim when it was in the grain form, maybe you could do it while it was already in the storehouse. So Amalei, he says Alech Amakra, because of your question. The pasuk says Mikol matnesechem tarimu as kol trumas Hashem. From all that I've given you, you have to set apart that which is the Truma of Hashem. So what's the raya here? So it seems to be that the pasuk is telling you that the Levi has to give a piece of what he's getting to the Kohen. Umara Isa. Well, what do you see in the pasuk that tells me that that the Levi would have to take of Truma Gedola and Truma Meiser? Ha idgon v'haloi idgon. Says Abaye, this is grain and that is not yet grain. Meaning, it's not yet matnesechem, it seems. Mikol matnesechem tarimu is called Trumas Hashem. Once it is something that could be given as matana, then you have to take off Kol Trumas Hashem. That seems to be the limit, and therefore the Levi in that case, as Abai, would have to take off Trumas Meiser and Truma Gedala. The Gemara continues to analyze the Mishnah. Meiser Sheni v'Hektar Sheniftu. What about Meiser Sheni, the second Meiser that needs to get eaten in Yerushalayim, and Hektish, or if it was dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash, Sheniftu, that was redeemed, meaning there was an extra fifth that was added to it. Pshita, says the Gemara, what are we talking about? If you took off the keren, meaning you've set aside the keren, but you haven't set aside the penalty yet. And what the Mishnah is telling us is that the chomish is not ma'akev, meaning that it's not going to hold back that grain from being permissible. You paid the keren, you've set aside the money for the keren. I don't have any cash on me. When I come back later, I'll put down the chomish as well. Even though you have not yet set aside the chomish, it still works. Says the Gemara back, Kahanim b'chala b'truma. Kahanim can make their matzahs out of chala and truma. Says the Gemara, pshita, that is for sure obvious. Ma'udatema, what would you have said? That meaning they can eat it. Matzah shava l'chol adam ma'inam. No, in order to be able to eat matzah, it has to be shareable with everybody else. Kamash malan, matzahs, riba. And when the pasuk says matzahs, it tells us that it means all sorts of matzahs, even though these matzahs can only be eaten by a small group of people or a subset of the Jewish people. Meaning there's a havamina that the entirety of the Jewish people needs to eat matzah, needs to be able to eat from the same matzah. It's interesting to note that when the Gemara in Sukkah is discussing the minimum size of a sukkah, so the Gemara says that the maximum size of the sukkah is kol yishol ru'uyin lasheves b'sukkah achas. There is no maximum size of the sukkah. It could be so large, meaning so wide, that the entirety of the Jewish people could fit in one sukkah, that would be okay. Says the Gemara, aval lo b'tevel, but you are not allowed to make your matzah out of tevel. Means you're not allowed to make matzah out of something which no trumas and ma'aser can be taken from. Says the Gemara pshita. Yeah, well that's obvious. Loi tzricha. No, you do need this. But tevel midrabanan shazar ba'atzis nakuf. Well, what are we talking about here? We're talking about tevel, which is tevel midrabanan. I mean, the rabbi said that it's tevel. It's not tevel midaraisa. Meaning shazar ba'atzis she'en nakuf. It means that you planted it in an unperforated pot. Meaning, took seeds, grain, you put it in unperforated, it's not connected to the ground. Midaraisa, that is not called grain, meaning it's not called gedule karka, it didn't grow in the ground. And therefore, you don't have to take off any trumas and maashes. But the Rabbanan said, yes, you do. So we're talking about tevel midrabanan. V'lo b'maser rishon shaloi nitla trumasai. And the din is that you have to, you're not allowed to make matzah from Maser Rishon shaloi nitla trumasai that didn't have truma taken from it, meaning the Levi hasn't taken his trumas meiser. Says the Gemara pshita. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. Shaloi nitla trumasai lo tzricha. No. We're talking about a case shigdimai bekeri that bechri. We're talking about a case like we were discussing before that the Levi took his meiser before the Kohen took his truma, and he is only given truma gedola. He is not given truma gedola; he's only given trumas meiser. And it's in the case that he took it, he separated it away when it was in grain form already, not while it was on its stalks. What might you have said? Could the Amalei Rapapa Abai, like the question that Rapapa said to Abai, Kamashmalan and therefore the conclusion of the Mishnah is what Abaye answered Rapapa, that it doesn't work. You're not allowed to use Ma'aser Sheni and Hektish that were not redeemed. Pshita, that's obvious. Says the Gemara, no, they were redeemed. So then what do you mean it wasn't redeemed? Because it wasn't redeemed in accordance to the halacha. If you have Ma'aser Sheni that was redeemed onto a blank coin. I mean, asimon is old Israeli coin, but in the Gemara, an asimon means a round disc of metal that doesn't have any imprint on it. The Rahman Amud, the Torah says, "V'tzarta hakesef davar sheyesh letzura," that it has to v'tzarta hakesef. You will type the money in your hand. So the Gemara has a limit on that. What does it mean? V'tzarta, it has to have a tzura, it has to have a form and a format. Says the Gemara, "V'hektish shechilo al gabe karka," and hektish, that shechilo al gabe karka, that you redeemed it by exchanging it for land instead of for money. The Rahman Amud, the Torah says, "V'nasan hakesef v'kamla," that you have to give money and then you'll be able to use it. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, Adam Yachol Adam Yotze Adam Yidecha Wasa B'Tevel Shaloi Niskan. Maybe you would think that. Hi guys, I'm in the middle of shir, so says the Gemara, Yachol Yotze Adam Yidecha Wasa B'Tevel Shaloi Niskan. Maybe you would fulfill the chiv of matzah with tevel, with grain Shaloi Nitkan that didn't have any of the trumas ma'asers taken off. Kol tevel nami ha lo nitkan. So all other kinds of tevel means that it was a nitkan. What do you mean tevel shelo nitkan? Says the Gemara, Ella betevel shelo nitkan kol tzarcha. You have tevel that is quasi tevel. It has had some things taken from it, but not all of them. Shnidle mimenu truma gedala v'noin lidro trumas ma'aser. Ma'aser rishon v'lo ma'aser sheni v'afilu ma'aser ani. Minai. Says the Gemara, we're talking about something that grain that they took off the first truma for the kohen, but didn't take ma'aser. Or trumas ma'aser. Ma'aser rishon v'lo ma'aser sheni. You took off ma'aser rishon, but not ma'aser sheni. Says the Gemara, v'afilu ma'aser ani minai. How do you know that even if you didn't take off ma'aser ani, the thing that belongs to the poor, that you are also chayiv there? Says the Gemara, Talmud Laimar, lo yisachal alav chametz. Don't eat chametz. Mi she'isurai mishum bal teichal alav chametz. The prohibition is that you're not allowed to eat on it chametz, meaning that it needs to be something that the violation would be because of the isur of chametz. Ela mishum bal techel tevel. But this yatsa zeh she'eni isur mishum bal techel chametz. Ela mishum bal techel tevel. This excludes anything that the reason that you're not allowed to eat it was already because it was tevel, not because it is chametz. Says the Gemara, "Isur de chametz lahechas." Well, then where did the isur of chametz go? Where did such a thing go? Amar Rav Shesha says, "Hamani Rabbi Shimon." This is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Ein Isur Chalal Isur, which is an enormous sugya in Shas. Ein Isur Chalal Isur. When something is asur, it cannot no double jeopardy. You can't have something that's asur become asur again. Once it's asur, it's asur. The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon tells us, turning over onto Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, Ha'eichel nevela b'Yom Kippurim pater. That if somebody eats nevela on Yom Kippur, if you ate something treif on Yom Kippur, then you are pater. Why? Because there is no isur of eating treif food on Yom Kippur. You are already violating the isur of eating non-kosher food. And therefore, that's not called eating on Yom Kippur because there is already one isur. And Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we will continue with this sugya tomorrow Shabbos and Maseches Shabbos, and everybody should have a beautiful Shabbos and Gemara Chasima Tova.